Okay, friends, I want to welcome you to the Bridge Between Us podcast today. I have two people we actually face-to-face met in October. I have actually been hearing about them for a little over 2 years because we actually went through the same process writing our book. So if you've read my book, The Daring Rescue, you're also going to want to get Tony and Alisa's book, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy, The Secret to an Extraordinary Marriage. And right now you may be thinking, wait a minute, I'm not listening to this podcast because of my marriage. I'm listening to this podcast because I want to help my child. But one thing I've learned on this journey is, God's heart is for families and his heart is for marriage. So welcome to the podcast, Tony and Alisa.
Oh, well, thank you, Melinda. We're so honored. And it was a super thrill getting to meet you in person because we've walked this journey of writing books within that same process and coaching. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a good one. So how I met y'all was actually at a marriage conference. And one thing that my husband and y'all were the keynote speakers, you led it. It was such a fun weekend. So, hey, if anybody's listening and looking for someone to help lead a marriage retreat at your church or any groups that you have, I highly recommend Tony and Alisa. But my husband and I went, we're a blended family. So we just celebrated last week, we celebrated 12 years of marriage.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And so one of the things that we determined when we married was every year we were going to be intentional about working on our marriage. We were going to take one weekend or 1 week away, and it would not be just to go off to a beach somewhere and chill out, but it would be something there. We would be challenged in our conversation. We would be encouraged and equipped. And so we attended one of your marriage conferences. I just want to thank you so much for your honesty, your transparency. And I want to offer that gift today to our listeners, because I do believe that marriage is so important for families. It's at the heart of God. And it's also, unfortunately, probably one of the first things we put on the back burner when we walk through difficulties with our children.
Oh, absolutely.
And so today I would just love to equip and embolden parents right now. And so tell us just a little bit about your book, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy.
Yeah, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy. So Alisa and I have been podcasting for 15 years at this point. So the One Extraordinary Marriage Show. And from the beginning, Alisa and I began speaking on marriage. And our first book that we wrote alluded to these 6 pillars, but after listening to The One Family after many a years, we just started to realize there are these 6 pillars. There are these 6 areas in marriage where people and couples really need to dive into. They need to strengthen to have that extraordinary marriage. And so in 2021, 6 Pillars of Intimacy came out, and those 6 pillars are emotional, physical, financial, spiritual, recreational, and then sexual intimacy. And it's transformed our lives, and we've seen it transform thousands and thousands of couples around the world.
So on the way to the conference, my husband and I were like, okay, let's see if we can figure out what the six pillars are. And we got all of them. We did not guess a couple of them. But today I know we cannot go over all of them in this podcast. And that's why I really want to encourage the listeners to go and purchase your book. But I want us to first talk about intimacy, because in your chapter 2, you say intimacy is more than sex.
Yes.
And that can be difficult for us to have right now when we're walking through hard, painful times, when we're walking through times of grief. There's the 5 stages of grief. And so we're not always, as a couple, going to be on the same wave. I may be in a place of depression. My husband may be in a place of anger or even acceptance. And so that intimacy, to me, is something that brings us back together, a place where we can connect. So what are some ways that you could just encourage parents there?
Well, first, let me come back to that statement that you pulled out of the book, that intimacy is more than sex, because this word intimacy has really been corrupted by society. Like, I mean, you were there at the conference, when we say, what do you think of when you hear the word intimacy? Probably 90% of the room said sex. And yet, at its core, intimacy is closeness and connection. It's why when you talk about, our relationship with God, there's an intimacy there. There's a closeness and connection that's built in us bringing our prayers, and whether it's the prayers for our children or the prayers for our marriage or just what we're going through on a daily basis, that communication is intimacy. And I often say the other part of that is that you can't be having sex 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how do we cultivate closeness and connection with our spouse for the other, I don't know, let's just say 23 hours a day, or, 167 hours a week, however frequently you're having sex. And so coming into this place, especially when you're in those 5 stages of grief, right? When you're riding this roller coaster that is very much, as you so beautifully laid out in your book, The Daring Rescue, this journey that you're on. It's being in this place of saying, how do we create closeness and connection? Coming to our emotional intimacy, which I reference as the workhorse in the book. It's, what are those conversations the two of you are having? I was so struck in reading your book at this, just this overwhelming sense myself of, how would I respond? And would I withdraw, which I'm sure a lot of people do, or do you want to use all your words and verbally process? And so it's finding that bridge as a married couple to go, we need both. We need the introspection, but we also need the communication and a willingness to listen when the emotions are literally all over the place, minute by minute, right?
Oh, yeah, it can change. I mean, in a second. 1 minute you're angry, the next minute you're feeling sorry for or wanting to protect. And that's one thing that my husband and I have had to learn how to walk through, is when we process things. So I'm someone, I just need to step back, take some time by myself and process. And then maybe this afternoon or maybe tomorrow we can have that conversation.
Sure.
My husband is one where he's like, no, this is happening right now. I want to talk about it right now. And I'm like, I can't do that. So for other couples out there like that, what words of wisdom do you have for them when they are like that? Because I think more often times we marry someone who isn't quite like us, which is a good thing, because if we're the same, one of us isn't necessary.
That in the book.
Exactly. And Alisa and I would be very similar to you and your husband, where I want to just like, let's dive into it. And Alisa's like, hold up, I need a process. So it doesn't matter where you are in life or what's going on in life. When we look at our marriage, if that's how your dynamic is playing out, the best gift you can give your spouse is to go, for my perspective of where I want to use all my words right now, the best gift I can give Alisa is give her time to process. And I need to just, put my ego aside, put where I am aside and go, Alisa, go process. How much time do you need? For her, though, on her side, to build the trust and continue to allow the trust to be between us. If we say, hey, 30 minutes, we need to come back and begin to discuss this, Alisa needs to engage me to go like, okay, I've processed, or I need a little more time. Because what ends up usually happening is the one who needs to process will then just go take their time and just keep processing, where us who need the verbal processing is like, what's going on? Like, you keep running away and I need to talk about this, and you're not bringing yourself back into this conversation. So now I'm frustrated and I begin to lose trust in our ability to strengthen or even work in our emotional intimacy.
That's good. How would you say, I love that you said that it is a gift that we can give one another, and it's just learning to honor one another in the differences that God and the ways that God has created us. What would you say, while we're on this, I want to talk about this, Tony, because this actually is a question that has come through from a father, and we're talking about intimacy right now. But his question was, how do I comfort and protect my wife when my child has done something that has hurt my wife? And how do I continue to love my child and not become angry at them for hurting my wife?
That's a big, yeah, it's a big one. I think one of the things I always told my children, even as young, like, your mom always comes first. I will always protect your mom. I will love you with all my heart. And yet, if you try to hurt your mother, I will always come to her side. And it doesn't mean I don't love you anymore, but God has called me to be her husband and to protect her. And then I can address you or whatever that may be. And so I think there were times when life, hit us at different times. And I had to rise up to that occasion and let either child know, like, that is unacceptable, the way you are treating your mother. I will not allow that. And so you need to really think about how you're going about your own emotions, and we can address that differently if you need help, therapy, whatever that may be. But in the end, in this house, I will always protect your mother, and that's where we're at. And I know it's a little hard and fast, but I'm not going to allow my children to talk down to Alisa, to talk bad against her. And if needed, she can fend for herself. But if needed, I will stand up for her, and then I will deal with my children separately.
And I can imagine, Alisa, that just deepens the intimacy that you have with him, and that comfort and knowing that you're protected and you're fought for.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all have this deep desire to be seen, heard, valued. And when our lives are in turmoil, it can feel like that just like flies out the window. And so, I mean, it's a challenging position to be in when your child hurts your spouse. And, stepping into this place of even being able to kind of like take a step back and see, okay, what are all the relationships here? Where's the hurt coming from? And if there's one thing that Tony and I have learned in being a factor in so many marriages over the last 15 years is that so often hurt comes out of that internal pain, and we don't have words for it. Or we don't know how to process that pain. And so we lash out and hurt somebody else. And so it's stepping into this place of going, where's this hurt coming from? Why is our child doing this? Right? Why are they acting like this towards you? And how do we rally the two of us as a team to process, handle, and deal with this situation with our child? So,
and I do want to say, tag on to Alisa, being on the same team. So a lot of times things of that nature will happen. And then it's sort of just looking at the situation, making sure everybody's in a good spot, but then Alisa and I retreating together and coming up with the plan and trying to get ourselves as much as in line as we can. And so we are talking the same talk to the children or to anybody else, because again, we need to protect us first and foremost. And that could be from friends, family, coworkers, whatever that may be. That's the way we've seen it.
Prayer as a couple together is another thing that actually can increase intimacy. Share with us about that, and maybe a couple of tips that maybe one spouse wants to pray together, the other one is either shying back from it or is unsure of that situation. How would you encourage parents or couples to walk through that?
So it's kind of like, one spouse needing time to process and one spouse jumping in. There are a lot of marriages where one spouse wants to pray and pray together, pray out loud, and the other one's like, I'm not so sure how this is all going to go down. And one of the things I do say in the book is that spiritual intimacy can actually be more vulnerable, more connecting than sexual intimacy. Because when someone allows you to hear the words that they're speaking to God, what they're crying out for, what their heart is longing for, what they are dealing with, you get a window into a relationship that you're part of, but you're also an observer. It's this beautiful moment. And it's okay if you're not comfortable praying out loud. Your spouse may just need you to be there and hold their hand while they're stepping into this place of prayer. And I would say, if you're not comfortable, just hold hands. Even being able to communicate that to your spouse, like, this feels a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And taking baby steps, because building these 6 pillars of intimacy doesn't just happen. It's not like somebody's like, oh, you know what? We're going to pray together, especially in crisis, and this is just going to be roses. No, it's like, okay, what do I even say? I remember during COVID, we were working on a project together. We were in my office, and I just had this weird physical thing that happened. And then I actually had difficulty speaking after it. And Tony's like, honey, you need to pray right now. We need to pray. And I just remember looking at him, and basically all I could say to him was, the only thing I can say is, Jesus, you need to pray. Because that's like my speech was being impacted and whatnot. And that's all I have. And sometimes in these moments, Jesus is the only prayer you have. And if that's all your spouse has, honor that and stand with them while their heart cries out for Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I've heard the word. I've said it. Y'all have both said it as well. Honor your spouse. And that can be sometimes easy, and then sometimes it can be really difficult, because sometimes on this journey we can even view our spouse as the enemy, as someone who is not for us, who is either not protecting us or not behaving in a way that we expect them to behave. Again, with the 5 waves of grief, we're not always going to be on the same wave. In fact, more times than not, we're not. So what are some ways that parents can honor one another or move into that place? Perhaps you haven't even thought of honoring your spouse before, but I believe that that is something God has called us to do. We're to honor one another as husband and wife, but also honor one another as image bearers.
Well, you said something in there that I think really, if we can come back to it for just a second, you talked about expectations. And a lot of times we can get into a place of dishonoring one another when we feel like our expectations aren't being met. Sometimes that's because we haven't voiced them. We're just expecting our spouse to be able to read your mind. And you're like, well, you should know. We've been together for, 10 years. We've been together for 20 years. You've been together for 30. You should just know that this is what I need. And yet when we're on a roller coaster, all the predictability flies out the window. Like you're talking about being indifferent. And so one of the ways to honor one another is to actually share what it is that you need. To share, like that's honoring. For me to come to Tony and say, hey, in this situation, I need X. I'm not expecting you to know. I'm just going to straight up tell you. And to the best of your abilities, I need you to do that. And then if he can ask questions, hey, what would that look like? Right? So that he's not just putting his Tony filter on it. He's actually finding out what the Alisa filter, like, what is Alisa thinking?
I love that.
Right. Because you have to ask. Otherwise, we just put our own spin on things and we miss the mark.
Yep.
But coming into this place of honor starts with communication. We can't just honor if we don't know, if we don't know what stage of grief they're in, if we don't know what will bring comfort to them. I distinctly remember when Tony's dad was dying 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago now. And I'll tell you, Melinda, we were making our bed, fluffing the sheets, and he looks at me and he says, and we knew it was towards the end, and he's like, I'm going to need more sexual intimacy this month. And I was just like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Because when I am dealing with grief or intense emotions, my tendency is not to want that. But he spoke up in this place of like, here's where I'm writing. I need that connection from you. And I was just like, okay, it wouldn't have been my answer, but it was his answer. And that's where being able to even honor our marriage relationship in that place of grief, to go, okay, I understand it's a point of connection. And that may be the kinds of conversations that the two of you need to have to be able to honor and show that you can meet those needs.
Yeah. And the thing I would say, and we tell this to the one family all the time, don't do it alone. If you need a marriage coach, if you need a counselor, a therapist, whatever it is, we are in the day and age where you can get access to help. This isn't like when Alisa and I have been married 28 years. This isn't like 28 years ago when there was very little and you had to go into somebody's office and you weren't really even sure and all this sort of stuff. Today, in the age that we are in, you can get on Zoom with a coach. You can get on Zoom with a therapist. Get help. You don't need to do this and suffer alone and think like you need to carry all the burden and try to figure all of this out. There is a lot going on. The waves are crashing on you and you're trying to get your head above water, but you don't have a lifeboat. You don't have a raft near you. So get a raft, get a lifeboat, get somebody next to you who can go, hey, we've been there. We've been through this. I've been through this. And this is how you can start walking through and seeing different things. And Alisa does our coaching here and all the marriage coaching here at One Extraordinary Marriage. And that's a lot what happens. It's just bringing different perspectives. showing different ways, giving you tools that you can use in your marriage. So that way you don't just point fingers and go like, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Okay, well, how about if we take this one tool and use it this week and see what happens?
Mm. I love that thought of just getting tools in your tool belt. And I think about in my book, I use warrior in throughout my book. And, warriors have tools as well. I mean, they're not called tools, they're called weapons and armory and our gear and all of that. But, God has given us those things to walk through life. He knows. I love Psalm 103 that, states that he knows that we're made of dust. And he's given us community, he's given us family, and he's given us himself and the guidance and the comfort and the leading of the Holy Spirit. So I love that. I want to switch just a minute, because another thing, not only do we put our marriage on the back burner, we put fun on the back burner. And fun is needed in a marriage. It's needed in a family. And there are times, even in dark times, we have to lift that mood. We've got to come up for air. And so talk to us about that, the just having fun, enjoying one another, and going out and doing things that make us smile.
Well, and I think when life feels so uncertain, it's starting with small things, right? As a marriage coach, I'll often tell my couples, I'm like, start with an ice cream cone. It's going to melt. Like, there's a finite amount of time for an ice cream cone, right? And you can enjoy it. You're having all that time. Work up to the longer dates or things that are fun in that capacity. But it's like Tony, he's so cute. I'll come out every once in a while, walk into his office, and he's watching like America's Got Talent. Like, that's his, and he's like, watch this video. It's his thing. He watches all of these heart-rending, auditions and whatnot. And it's beautiful. Or we'll send each other funny things throughout the day. Start with what you've got at your fingertips, right? If there's a game that the two of you love to just go off and you haven't done it in a few years, go do that. If the area around you lends itself to going for walks and you can just get away and just be the two of you, or go to a coffee shop and just people watch, because it just gets you off of what you're dealing with. Play a game. Sometimes we have to take a step back and say, I can see the storm swirling around me. I feel like I'm in it. I just need to put myself on the beach for a hot minute, catch my breath again.
Yeah.
And I can go back into it. And I will go back into it. But right now, we as a couple just need a moment where we're going to say, hey, we're just going to do us for 15 minutes, for half an hour, and remember what it's like to be husband and wife again.
Yeah. And for us, and I just want to share, I mean, we all go through different struggles in life and in marriage. I don't care if you've been married a week, if you've been married 30 plus, 40 plus years. And just in the last 6 months for Alisa and I, we picked up and moved us and our daughter. Our son stayed back in San Diego, and we moved to Naples, Florida. And after I grew up in Southern California. We raised our children in San Diego, California, and we picked up. And guess what? That was pretty, I mean, it was a lot, and a lot of things changed and a lot of things happened. And Alisa and I had to step into our recreational intimacy, which is the fun pillar, the activity pillar. And we had to find ways to do exactly what you're saying. Like, what do you have to do? And we just did little things. And sometimes it was just like, just got to get out of the house and get to the beach. Like, we got to just change the scenery. And it was like, I was saying, we were in a place of just like, wow, there's a lot happening. And we just need to take a little time to have fun for ourselves and enjoy our new area and what is ahead and what life will bring, and not just focus on like, oh my gosh, we just lost a car and we need to buy a new car and we got to figure this out and that's not working out. So, yeah, find the little things. It doesn't have to be extravagant. It can be small.
What would you say to the parent right now that is listening in and say, yeah, I hear this, but right now I feel like I need to step in. I feel like my focus has to remain my child. I don't have time for fun. That actually right now seems to me like it would be a selfish thing.
I've read your book, and I've also coached couples who have been on this journey, this very specific journey of their child coming out to them with same-sex attraction and things like that. Self-care is not selfishness. Those are two very, very different things. Doing what is necessary for you to be strengthened, for you to have the energy to navigate this journey is actually probably the healthiest thing you can do, because you have to be resourced. You can't pour into your child's journey and into all of what this is if you are operating at zero. If the marriage falls apart, like I keep looking at the title of your book behind you, and I keep thinking, if couples don't take care of the marriage, then there's going to need to be two rescues. Not just the rescue of the child, but the rescue of the couple. And to be quite honest, most people don't have the energy to do both. So yes, it might feel selfish, but you need that strength. Your spouse needs that strength. They need to know that they matter still in the midst of this storm, that you still see them. Don't set yourself up for needing to rescue both your marriage and your child.
Yes. Yes. And I don't think I can stress enough the importance of a strong marriage or a healthy marriage, because I truly believe that that is the foundation, and that is a assured hope even for our children. And I believe that the stronger we are, the united we are, the more we actually have to offer our children.
Mm-hmm. And they see it, and you said it, like they see it, and they go, oh wow, they're doing it. They're walking the walk. They're talking their talk, but they're putting their marriage at the forefront and themselves. And our children will see it, and they're going to make their own decisions at times. It's tough watching them grow up and become adults and do their thing. And as a parent, pray for them, continue to speak life into them, continue to pick up the phone when they don't want to pick up the phone, continue to text them, continue to love them. And yet our first priority, and my first priority, is the vows that we made on our wedding day. And that was between us, two shall become one. And then our children came. Yeah, if you're in a blended family like you are, children are already there. And yet you still understand that the vows you made on that wedding day still come before those children, because we need to have this strength between us to be able to pour into them.
Yeah. One of the prayers that my husband and I have is that our marriage will be such a reflection of God that our children will desire that as well. And so that's another thing that keeps us working on us. One is because we've been down that road of divorce, and neither of us wanted that. It takes two. We've walked through a healing process, and we are like, okay, God has given us this opportunity, and we want to honor him with this. And it's one of the greatest gifts. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you're like, oh, I was hoping she would ask me this, or I would love to share this with listeners?
The big thing for me is the two tenets that we always speak about. And no matter where you are in life or what's going on, if you feel stuck, be intentional and take action. And I think no matter what you may be facing, even in myself, I find myself facing stuff, and I'm like, okay, how can I be intentional and how can I take action? And so by doing those things allows me to move, because I'm all about like, how do we keep moving forward? Because we are on a journey. And I love, your armor and putting on, you're a warrior, right? We're putting on the armor of God.
Yes.
And, when we read that in Ephesians, it's an action. It's not like we're just standing there and God's putting this on us. I see it as we're walking, as we're moving, and these pieces are being applied to us as we're going on our journey. And so I would say, get up and start moving in a direction that you need to go, and let growth happen, and allow prayer to be like, just get out there and just be praying and pressing in and being able to go, okay, things may not always look the way I see them, but I do know that in the spiritual realm, because this is a spiritual warfare that we're fighting, that God is on my side. He's fighting for me. My God is for me. And if my God is for me, who shall be against me? Just be intentional, take action. That's what I love.
What about you?
having read your book and just walked with other couples along this journey, I think what you are doing is so powerful in normalizing the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually something that needs greater attention. And so I'm glad that you're doing it, because I do believe that there are a lot of Christian parents unsure how to navigate this. And so if I can just applaud you for having the courage to be a voice around a topic that can stir up so many different conflicting emotions, like I said, all within like the same 5-minute period on any given day. But I'm grateful that there are voices like yours who will tackle the tough topics. It's similar to what Tony and I do, but just in the marriage space, and who aren't afraid to handle this. And my prayer would be that everyone that's listening hangs on to your courage if they don't have it for themselves. Borrows your courage, I guess, is probably a better way to say that. And it's okay if you borrow Melinda's courage. I mean, tell anybody that's listening, it's okay to borrow her courage and have the conversations, take the actions that you need to do to get yourselves one step closer to that daring rescue.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have been asking the guests over the last couple of months, when we walk through difficult seasons, we see more of all the darkness around us. But I believe too that God has given us treasured gifts, hidden gifts in the painful seasons. So looking back over your life, what are some gifts that God has, maybe just one gift that God has given you in a deep season of pain?
Wow. First of all, that's a great question. Like, let me just acknowledge that's a great question. For me, in between our two children in 2004, we lost our son, Andrew. He was delivered at 18 weeks. And to this day, I know that my nursing staff was heaven sent because of the prayers that they whispered in my ears in my darkest hour of losing a child, of sitting on a maternity ward and hearing babies, knowing that our son, would never actually take a breath. But to have two angels with their nursing sweaters on, to be a part of that process and a part of the healing process, to bring, obviously it's been 20 years, but to bring just healing in that moment.
Yeah.
What about you, Tony?
The biggest gift that I've seen through a struggle, there's a couple, but I think the one that I think of is early on in our marriage. We were $50,000 in debt. Ran across Dave Ramsey when we were living in Spokane, Washington. And I remember being so scared that we were going to lose everything, and I didn't know how to pull it all together. And then I started listening to this guy, which people do with us. They start listening to us and they're like, how do I share this with my spouse? And they probably, same with you, people would come across yours and they're like, how do I share this? But I remember just sharing that with Alisa and her having some reservations and like, what is this? And who is this guy? And not fully in. And yet over time, we got on the same page. And it was the first time in our young marriage at that point in time, 5 years, we got on the same team. And it was such a gift because I look at it now, 28 years married, I still look back at that time 23 years ago. And I was like, that was the first time we were ever on the same team. And we continue to do that. And I pray that we continue to do that for many, many years, because we're not going anywhere soon and probably going to, live until like 60 years married or something. So that's, so I just see that as just a huge gift during a very difficult and tough time.
And I love that God used someone else to help y'all through that. I mean, you probably, I don't know, maybe you've met Dave Ramsey, I don't know, but God used him to impact your life and your marriage. And now you're impacting the generations to come. I love that God's body is big. He has a huge family.
Yes.
And he has such a unique and powerful way of connecting us in times of need. So I want to thank both of you so much for joining me here today. I know that these parents are just going to be blessed when this interview goes out. Real quick, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, best place to go to oneextraordinarymarriage.com. And you can learn all about us. You can learn about the podcast, the book, and other things that we have going on. But that's the first and the best place to just start.
Yeah. Okay. And y'all have a cruise coming up.
Yes.
I don't know if you still have space open.
We don't.
Okay. So maybe
That's
next
close.
year. Maybe next year they can
Yes.
get on your email list and start following you, and maybe be able to get onto a cruise if you do another one next year. But that's a great way to have fun and
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
reconnect in marriage. So, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And listeners, I want to thank you today for joining us. You know, you may be sitting in your car listening to this all by yourself, but I want to encourage you that you have been intentional and you are taking action, just as Tony said, and you are finding ways to honor your family, honor your child, and honor your spouse. And so I want to tell you that you are courageous and you are brave. You are not alone. And just as Alisa said, you are more than welcome to hold on or to borrow my courage during this time. I was once there myself, and my prayer is that one day every single listener will be able to pay it forward and come to a place where they're able to begin pouring into, even if it is just one other parent. So as we close today, make sure you check out the show notes. Please share this episode with other families. Perhaps you're in a parent support group or just at a group in your church or community. Share this with them. Together we're better. And so let's get the word out that there are resources. We don't have to go at this alone. And remember that God has entrusted this journey and your child to you. And as we engage with him, he will equip us for each next step. I'll talk to you next week, friends.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bridge Between Us podcast with Melinda Patrick. To find out more, go to melindapatrick.org. Once you're there, you can check out the many resources that Melinda has available. Also, you can book Melinda for your next speaking engagement. Just click on the speaking tab at the top of the page for more information. All of this can be found at melindapatrick.org. Thank you for listening in today. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of The Bridge Between Us with Melinda Patrick. In The Daring Rescue, a new book from Melinda Patrick, parents learn how to join Jesus Christ in his pursuit of your LGBTQ identifying child's heart. In 2011, Melinda was faced with her own daughter embracing that lifestyle, so she is all too familiar with the struggle parents can face when confronted by their own children who identify with this compromising community. Through The Daring Rescue, parents will regain hope and will be encouraged to still love well while holding on to God's eternal truth. Even though culture can be shifting and affecting children of Christian parents, this book will equip and embolden moms and dads to be a vessel through which Jesus Christ can minister to their LGBTQ identifying child. The Daring Rescue is a must-read because we are in a war, and the lives of our children and future generations are at stake. The Daring Rescue by Melinda Patrick, available now.